My sister stood in my new kitchen, wine glass in hand, looked around at the marble countertops and the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the backyard, and laughed, actually laughed, a short, sharp sound, before she said, loud enough for the 8 or 9 guests near us to hear, "Okay, but who actually helped you afford this? Because we both know it wasn't you." The room went quiet the particular way rooms go quiet when someone says the thing everyone was thinking, but nobody was going to say out loud. I smiled. I took a sip of my own wine, and I said, "Nobody helped me, Claire. I bought it myself." She laughed again, softer this time, more of a scoff, and said the sentence I'm going to remember for the rest of my life. "You'll never afford a house like this. Not on your salary. Come on." What my sister didn't know, what nobody in that kitchen knew except my husband and the attorney who'd handled the closing 3 weeks earlier, was that she was about 6 words into insulting a house that, as of that morning, was legally, entirely, 100% in my name alone. Not our parents' name, not my husband's name even, by my own choice, for reasons I'll explain. Mine, and she was about to find that out in the worst possible way, from the worst possible person, in about 11 minutes. Let me back up, because this didn't start in my kitchen. It started almost 15 years ago, and my sister has been underestimating me for every single one of them. I'm 33. I work as a senior structural engineer for a firm that designs mid-rise commercial buildings, mostly office complexes and mixed-use developments. It's not a glamorous job in the way people imagine engineering to be. I'm not designing bridges in dramatic movie montages, but it pays extremely well, and it took me 11 years of school and licensing exams and unpaid internships to get here. My sister Claire is 36. She works in marketing for a boutique skincare brand, a job she got through a college friend and has held, more or less unchanged in title and salary, for about 7 years. I want to say clearly, before this story goes any further, that there is nothing wrong with that job. What's wrong is what Claire built on top of it, an entire identity, reinforced constantly by our parents, that she was the successful one, the one who had it together, while I was, in my family's shorthand, still figuring things out, despite the fact that I've had a stable, high-paying, licensed engineering career since I was 25. Here's how that shorthand got built, because it didn't happen by accident. Claire married young, 24, to a man named Derek who came from real money, the kind of family with a lake house and a name on a hospital wing. From the day of their engagement, my parents' entire framework for measuring success shifted to match whatever Claire had. Claire had a big wedding, so weddings became the measure of a life well lived. Claire and Derek bought a house in a gated community using a down payment his parents provided. So homeownership, specifically, homeownership funded by generous family, became proof of having made it. I didn't get married until 29, to a man named Miguel, a physical therapist, wonderful, stable, from a working-class family with no lake house and no hospital wing. Nothing about our life together looked like Claire's life, and in my family, different meant lesser. Not because anyone ever said it directly, because of 1,000 small comparisons that always resolved the same way. I need you to sit with 3 of those comparisons, because they explain everything that happened in my kitchen. Comparison 1. When I got my professional engineering license, a credential that takes years of supervised experience plus a brutal, multi-day exam with a national pass rate under 60%, I called my mother to tell her. She congratulated me for about 15 seconds, then pivoted immediately to how Claire and Derek were finally looking at a bigger house, now that Derek's bonus came through, and asked if I'd seen the listing photos yet. I had gotten a professional license that most people who attempt it never earn. My mother wanted to talk about listing photos. Comparison 2. 2 years ago, Miguel and I paid off both of our student loans, combined close to $90,000, done through 5 years of aggressive budgeting, moving in together early, driving a 12-year-old car well past when either of us wanted to. We told my parents at a family dinner, genuinely proud, expecting at minimum a "that's impressive." My father's response was, "Must be nice not having kids yet to worry about," a comment aimed squarely at the fact that Claire and Derek had a 2-year-old, as if debt-free finances and children were some kind of trade-off Claire had nobly made, and I hadn't. Claire, sitting right there, didn't correct him. She smiled. Comparison 3, the one that tells you everything you need to know about the dynamic. Last year, my firm promoted me to Senior Structural Engineer, a title that came with a raise that, for the first time in my life, put my annual income above Claire and Derek's combined household income, even accounting for Derek's family money. I know this for a fact because, and I'll get to why this matters, I'd recently had a conversation with my father about a completely unrelated topic, retirement planning, during which he'd mentioned Claire and Derek's approximate household number, unprompted, the way he tends to bring up their finances as a kind of running scoreboard. I did the math in my head at the dinner table and realized I'd quietly surpassed them. I didn't say anything. I'd learned by then that saying anything just got explained away. Well, Derek's bonus is coming. Well, they're saving for private school. Always some reason why Claire's numbers, whatever they were, mattered more than mine. By the time I bought my house, I had over a decade of data telling me that no accomplishment of mine would ever be weighed on its own. It would always be weighed against Claire, and Claire would always win, because the scoring system wasn't actually about numbers. It was about who my parents had decided, a long time ago, was the real success story in the family. Here's the part of this story that my family still, to this day, doesn't fully understand, because I never explained it to them, and I'm not sure I ever will. About 4 years ago, my engineering firm was hired to consult on the structural feasibility study for a mixed-use redevelopment project in a neighborhood that, at the time, most people in my city considered unremarkable. Solid, working class, nothing special, the kind of area real estate agents describe as up and coming, mostly because it hasn't happened yet. Part of my job was reviewing zoning changes, infrastructure investment plans, and municipal development proposals years before they became public knowledge, because that data directly affects structural load requirements and building codes for whatever gets built there. I saw, roughly 2.5 years before anyone else in my family or social circle would have had any reason to know, that the city had quietly approved a major transit expansion running directly through that neighborhood, along with a new secondary school and a mixed-use retail development 3 blocks from a very specific, very unremarkable street of 40-year-old single-family homes. I didn't say anything to anyone, not because it was some grand secret. The information wasn't classified. It was buried in municipal planning documents most people never read. But because I understood, from my professional work, exactly what that kind of infrastructure investment does to property values over a 5 to 10-year window. I'd watched it happen in 3 other projects. 18 months later, with Miguel fully on board and both of us having saved carefully for years, specifically because I'd been quietly, patiently waiting for the right property to become available, I found a run-down but structurally sound 4-bedroom house on that unremarkable street, listed by an elderly owner eager for a fast, uncomplicated sale. I paid for it almost entirely in cash, using savings I'd built over 8 years of that engineering salary my family had never once asked a follow-up question about, plus a small mortgage I paid off within 14 months, using bonus income from 2 additional consulting projects. And here's the detail that matters most for what happened at my housewarming. I put the house solely in my name, not because Miguel and I have any kind of trust issue. We don't. We've been together for years and married for 4 of them, but because of a piece of advice my attorney gave me that turned out to be more important than I could have known at the time. She told me that given my income trajectory and the specific asset, keeping the title solely in my name, with Miguel as beneficiary on all the relevant documents, actually offered better liability protection for a structural engineer whose name could theoretically be attached to legal exposure through my firm. It was a boring, practical, legal decision. It had nothing to do with anyone else in my family. Nobody in my family knew any of this. Not the zoning research, not the years of saving, not the sole ownership. As far as my parents and Claire understood, I'd simply, somewhat suddenly, found a house and moved in. By the time we hosted the housewarming, the neighborhood everyone in my family still thought of as that older area near the highway had been quietly rezoned. The transit line was under active construction 2 blocks away, and comparable homes on my street had appreciated by roughly 60% in under 3 years. My house, purchased for a number my family would have considered modest, was now worth substantially more than Claire and Derek's gated community property, the one his parents had subsidized, the one that had anchored a decade of unfavorable comparisons against me. Claire had no idea. She walked into my kitchen assuming, the way she'd always assumed about everything in my life, that whatever I had, it must be smaller, lesser, less impressive than what she had. She had absolutely no framework for the idea that the boring sister with the boring engineering job might have quietly outpositioned her. The party had been going for about 90 minutes when Claire arrived, fashionably late, Derek trailing behind her carrying a bottle of wine that was, I noticed, considerably cheaper than the ones she usually brought to our parents' house, a small, telling detail about how much effort she felt this particular gathering deserved. She did the tour our mother insisted on, room by room, our mother narrating like a real estate agent, genuinely proud, genuinely oblivious to the tension building behind her. Claire's face did something complicated as she walked through. Not quite admiration, not quite dismissal, somewhere in between, the expression of someone recalibrating in real time and not enjoying it. It was in the kitchen, standing near the island, surrounded by enough people to guarantee an audience, that she finally said what she'd clearly been sitting with since she walked in the door. Okay, but who actually helped you afford this? I told her the truth. Nobody helped me. I bought it myself. She laughed, and then came the line, "You'll never afford a house like this, not on your salary. Come on." Delivered with the easy confidence of someone who had spent 15 years being told, by everyone around her, that her sister was the one who didn't have things figured out. I want to walk through what happened next slowly, because unlike some stories where the reversal is one dramatic sentence, mine unfolded over about 10 minutes, through a conversation Claire started and couldn't stop once it was moving. I didn't raise my voice. I said, calmly, "I did afford it, Claire, on my salary. I've been saving for this for almost a decade." She rolled her eyes. I actually watched her roll her eyes at me, in my own kitchen, and said something about how, on paper, maybe the math worked, but everyone knew Derek's family had actually helped with their house, which is just smart, honestly, using resources you have, implying, not subtly, that my refusal to accept help from anyone was less a point of pride and more a kind of naive stubbornness that had left me, in her mind, worse off. This is the part where Derek, and I want to give him real credit here, because what he did wasn't planned, it was just a decent, curious man asking a normal question, turned to me and asked, genuinely, "How'd you find this street, though? It's not really an area people were looking at a few years back." I told him the truth, because there was no reason not to. I told him, briefly, about the transit expansion, the rezoning, the infrastructure timeline I'd had visibility into through my firm's consulting work, and the fact that I'd bought specifically because I understood, professionally, what was coming to this neighborhood before it was public knowledge. Derek's face changed. He works, it turns out, a detail I'd honestly half forgotten because our families rarely discussed his career in any depth beyond he works in finance, in commercial real estate investment analysis. He asked, more sharply now, what the appreciation had looked like on comparable properties. I told him. 60% in under 3 years, conservatively. He did the math out loud, comparing it to what he knew about his and Claire's own property, in the gated community, in a market that had grown far more modestly over the same period because it was already arrived, rather than up and coming, which meant it had far less room left to climb. And then Derek said the sentence that actually landed the reversal, not me, not any grand speech I'd prepared, just a man doing arithmetic out loud in front of his wife. Wait. Based on that appreciation rate, on a purchase price like that, this house is probably worth more than ours right now. The kitchen went quiet again, but it was a completely different silence than the one from 10 minutes earlier. Claire's face did something I'd genuinely never seen it do before, a kind of visible recalculation, the same one I'd watched happen on the house tour, except now it wasn't subtle at all. She looked at Derek. She looked at me. She said, in a voice that had lost most of its earlier confidence, that can't be right. This is a nothing neighborhood. I told her gently that it wasn't a nothing neighborhood anymore, and that it hadn't been for a while, and that I'd known that almost 3 years before anyone else in the family had any reason to. She asked, and I could hear something genuinely uncomfortable underneath the question now, whose name was on the deed, whether Miguel and I owned it together. I told her the truth. Mine. Solely mine. A decision my attorney and I had made for entirely practical reasons that had nothing to do with anyone else's opinions about my life. I didn't say it triumphantly. I didn't need to. The math had already done the work. Derek had done the work, actually, standing right there, out loud, in front of everyone. The house Claire had just mocked, moments earlier, in front of 9 witnesses, was not only fully mine, purchased with no family money and no help from anyone, but was now, by conservative estimate, worth more than the house she'd spent a decade holding over my head. She didn't apologize that night. I want to be honest about that, because I think a fake, tidy apology would make this story feel less true than it actually was. What she did was go quiet for the rest of the party, leave earlier than planned, and, according to my mother, spend most of the drive home asking Derek increasingly specific questions about property values and zoning that he, apparently, did not have complete answers to, which I found, privately, extremely satisfying. I'd be lying if I said the weeks after the housewarming felt like pure victory, because they didn't, not entirely. For years, I had absorbed a story about myself. Quiet sister, less impressive sister, the one who did things the slow, unglamorous, unsubsidized way, while Claire did things the fast, connected, family money way. And some deep, old part of me had actually started to believe it, even while another part of me knew, factually, it wasn't true. Watching that story collapse in front of 9 witnesses in my own kitchen didn't erase 15 years of internalizing it. It just finally gave me external proof to set against the internal doubt. My mother called me 2 days later. She didn't apologize for years of listing photo comparisons or must be nice not having kids yet comments. What she said instead was, "I didn't realize you'd done all that research, honey. That's really smart." Which, from her, was about as close to an acknowledgement as I was ever going to get. And I decided, in that moment, to accept it for what it was, rather than what I wished it had been. Claire and I still speak. It's different now, not warmer exactly, but more careful, more evenly weighted. She hasn't brought up my house again, not once, not even to ask a normal, curious follow-up question about the neighborhood, which tells me she's still processing it in whatever private way she processes things. I don't need her to grovel. I mostly just needed, after 15 years, for the comparison to finally run in a direction that reflected reality instead of family mythology. What actually changed my life wasn't watching Claire's face fall in my kitchen, satisfying as that moment was. It was realizing, in the weeks after, that I had spent over a decade measuring my own success against a scoreboard my family had rigged without even fully realizing they were doing it. And that the entire time, I'd already had everything I needed to walk away from that scoreboard completely. I just hadn't let myself see it yet. I think about why this story stuck with me so hard, beyond the obvious satisfaction of watching my sister's confidence collapse in real time, and I keep landing on the same thing. It's not really a story about a house. It's a story about how families build invisible scoreboards, often without ever saying a single explicit word about it, and how those scoreboards can quietly convince even a genuinely accomplished person that they're somehow behind. I had a professional license. Fewer than 6 in 10 people even pass on the first attempt. I had zero debt. I had a house I'd bought with a decade of patient, informed, entirely self-funded decision-making. And I still, for years, felt like the less successful sister, because that's the story my family had been telling, out loud and in silence, since I was a teenager. If you've ever had a sibling comparison hanging over you, a family scoreboard that never quite matched what was actually true, I think you already felt the shape of this story coming before Derek ever did the math out loud. That's not a coincidence. That dynamic is more common than families like to admit, and it rarely gets undone by a single confrontation. It gets undone slowly, the way mine did, by simply continuing to build something real while everyone else keeps score using an outdated system. The most satisfying part, honestly, wasn't the moment Claire found out about the deed. It was realizing, afterward, that I'd never actually needed her, or my parents, to notice at all. I would have kept building the exact same life either way. If you've made it this far, I want to know, has a sibling or a parent ever underestimated something you built, right up until they couldn't anymore? Tell me what happened in the comments. Some of the best stories I've heard have come from people sharing their own version of this exact moment. If this story felt familiar, there's more like it coming. I post a new one every few days, so if you don't want to miss the next one, you already know what to do. I'll see you in the next one.